Okay, good afternoon, almost evening. I'm really glad to be here and want to thank Maribel and thank everybody at nGage for inviting me to speak to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data-driven organization. I'm a practitioner. As Phil said, I have been a CTO and a CIO for the last 20 years, so I just can't work on the strategy. I have to work on the implementation. And in the implementation, I have to figure out how to get the organization to do things that it hasn't done before. So before I get to the data-driven organization, I want to talk a little bit about that in the context of digital transformation. And I really like what Maribel had said earlier today. Digital transformation's been around for a really long time. In fact, the first time I heard the term was a couple years ago. I was doing an interview and someone wrote the title of the article, 5 Ways CIO Can Participate in Digital Transformation. And I said, what's this digital transformation? We've been doing this for a very long time. And in fact, I had started doing it when I was a CTO of a SaaS company working in the media space 20 years ago when the internet came out. And when the internet came out, they started to figure out, what are we going to use this thing for, right? We have print. People like reading things in print. What are we going to use this thing for? And they started building websites up. And when they started to build websites out, they started putting some more of their content online. And what you see in this graph is that in the first 4 years of the internet boom, from roughly 1996 to roughly 2000, newspaper revenue actually increased during their early days of digital transformation. And it's because the internet was booming and they had a chance to experiment a little bit, put up websites, start charging for digital ads and seeing what was working. But what you were doing is you were advertising more, right? You were buying more employment ads, you were looking at more car ads. And so before there was a true disruption in media, newspapers were actually doing well. And then when the bust hit in 2001, you see that strong slope going down. You see that they started having new competitors from people like Craigslist and Cars.com and eBay and Monster.com. And we know how this story ends, right? So they're still bottoming out. Those early competitors were replaced with Facebooks and Googles and others who figured out how to really drive advertising and eyeballs on the internet, and the newspapers are nowhere. So I've had 20 years of experience of watching companies deal with this disruption. And when digital transformation came around, I said, this has been around for a very long time. Now, it's not just happening in media. This is a chart that came out in HBR several months ago. And media is still top of the list. And what you see here is a lot of things that are digitally oriented are at the top of the list. Financial services, retail, technology are all digital in nature. But what's happening is really a couple things, right? So the experiences are becoming either digital or the experience are becoming more integration of a physical and a digital world. And more companies are becoming more adept to doing things with the data that they have. And so that's creating a new bar for companies to compete in. It's creating the opportunity for more startups to come in. And the way most businesses have to do their business going forward has to change dramatically. So most of us are in the technology space. We're CIOs and we're working with our technology. And my question for you is, what are we going to do about it? Every one of your industries is going through some form of transition, some form of way of integrating with customers differently, some way of attracting prospects and making them more customers, some way of leveraging third-party data and plugging into ecosystems. And my question is, what are we going to do about it? So after I left being a CTO at a number of firms and helping companies do their digital transformation, I pivoted my career. And I actually went on to become a 3-time CIO in businesses that needed to transform. One of them was Business Week. Business Week went from a magazine to online to a social media play to now a big conglomerate underneath Bloomberg. I worked in the construction space, and then I worked in the financial services space, all helping existing businesses take legacy businesses and move it to digital. And what I found was that there were certain common patterns, certain things that as a CIO I needed to do as a practitioner to enable that transformation. It starts with the IT culture. Okay, a culture eats strategy for breakfast. I very much believe in that. But it isn't something that you can adjust and change head on. You can't just go up in front of your group and say, IT, we need to do things differently, and here's our new mission and values, because that won't get you very far. And it can't be about just going to your senior executive group and saying IT is going to be doing more than the service desk and the data center. It's about changing how you're actually operating. I've always started with a number of practices that are collaborative in nature, that get the IT organization doing things differently than they were before. If you're doing a lot of application development, Agile is a good place to start. If you've moved a lot into your infrastructure, you need to think about automation. You need to think about how you're going to get into continuous delivery. You need to think about monitoring the user experience. That's, for me, DevSecOps. We're going to talk a lot about being data-driven and innovation. But you can change a lot about how your IT group is practicing just by giving them more collaborative practices. The other side of it is a bunch of behavioral differences. These are things that you have to show by leading by example, by understanding your business. I used to have my IT leaders go through a sales training and demonstrate that they could sell the products that we were putting out to market. They weren't going to ever sell the product, but they actually had to knew the products from the perspective of a customer. A sharing and learning experience. So how many of you have people who are stars in your organization, but very difficult to work with to share their information, to be able to come back and say, this is how this piece of code works. I think it's very important that as you're scaling your groups, they need to understand how to share and their experiences with their colleagues. And transformation, how many of you feel that transformation is stressful, right? It ought to be stressful. You're getting out of your comfort zone. So I think very important is to find ways to have fun in your organization. So that's my bit on transformation. We're now going to talk about one of these in the becoming a data-driven organization. So I love charts. I love data that tells me I'm heading in the right direction. This one is one of the many studies that have been done that illustrate that you can become, the companies that are more data-driven are going to beat out their competitors. Now let's face it, we're in a competitive world today. We used to compete with our neighboring institutions. Now we're competing with other institutions that are moving into our space. We're competing with startups that are disrupting us. And the key to it is understanding who your customers are, what experiences provide them benefit, how do you collect data around them so that you can improve things, and how do you make that a more iterative experience. So the number one reason why you need to become more data-driven is that you need to be able to understand your customers and outcompete your competitor. Now, this is a second chart I found that really excited me, because the very first time I started putting up a lot of data visualizations and analytics and dashboards in my organization, the very first thing people start doing is they look at the data and say the data's wrong, right? And immediately you start getting into a conversation around data quality. I had one group, we put up a bunch of new analytics dashboards. We did it in a citizen data science program that I'll explain in a couple of slides. And we had a sales ops person come into our management meeting with some great dashboards that he was illustrating to the management team. And of course, the CEO looks at the first chart, points out one key account and says, what's going on with that key account? And sure enough, the data underneath it was wrong. It was because the salespeople hadn't updated the CRM recently. And so even something that's in the background, like data quality, that you don't think is important, becomes really important. And the number one business value of data quality turns out to be increased revenues. So even something as benign and behind the scenes as that becomes important. Now, what I found, I've been a CIO 3 times. I've implemented data science programs 3 times. They ended up converging into the same space, but they didn't all start at the same area. So this is a 4-step process, but I believe that in your organization, depending on your skills, depending on your culture, you're going to start in different areas of this bucket. And that last example, this was a company that had a top-down charter to become more data-driven, when in fact the CEO and the CFO were all processing their data with spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and we had to spend a lot of time educating them how to use actual tools. So in some organizations, you can start by just taking the charts and taking the data that you have and working with business leaders to understand how they can use the tools that you've already put out there to actually self-service and get data from them. In another one of my organizations, it started with the marketing department. They had too many tools. They had data coming in from Google Analytics, from 5 different marketing platforms, and they were trying to figure out how to put a voice of customer together with all these different data sources when an IT group wasn't ready to service them for a large number of reasons. So we helped them by providing a lot of citizen data science tools and letting them self-serve their ability to integrate data sources and do analytics off of it. I spoke to one company last week. They have a technology organization that's well beyond the capabilities. They built up big data platforms. They put all the data into a data lake, and they needed to find ways to take that data and provide value to their customers. So 3 different areas to start from. Very often they need to converge in the middle, thinking through what the strategy is, what's the governance around data, but most importantly, thinking through what the priorities are. Okay, so once you have some form of capability, how are you going to understand what to put it to use, which types of questions that people are asking are most important, and which one of those are you actually going to put resources against and try to solve. And so many of you are putting agile practices in place. This is a great place to put agile in your data science program and think through what the outcome might be if you solve a particular data science challenge, work backwards, and then commission the ones that have the highest value. Because you don't know once you get into a particular data science question, how hard is it going to be to actually go solve it. I think of the programs that you can put in place, I think outfitting what I call citizen data scientists is probably the thing that you'll get the most value from. Now, what is a citizen data scientist? This is somebody who works with data, okay, who's probably been using some spreadsheets, who may even be using some SQL to pull data from out of your enterprise systems and do a query and get an analysis off of it, but is doing it in ways that is not scalable, meaning they do a one-time analysis, they do a one-time output of it, it goes somewhere, and then if it ever has to get repeated again, they have to go off and repeat it again. So what I've discovered, and I think a lot of people have discovered, is that there's new tools and new programs that can take somebody who's been skilled at doing pivot tables and enable them to do self-service dashboards and data visualizations and even basic data science so that they can come back and provide tools to their organization. Maybe it's a marketing department, maybe it's a sales department. I've done it with an operations department. They get people to ask them questions. Instead of doing a one-time analysis, they put up a dashboard, and then you provide services for them so they know how to take that dashboard and actually put it to use within that department. If you are having trouble finding data scientists, it's one of the hardest roles to find. Okay, not all the analytics that you are doing requires the skills of a PhD data quant to actually go out and do, and yet you're sitting with a large number of people in your organization who can probably do some of this work. So I encourage you to look at how to take one of these programs and put it together. I have a post there on my blog that talks specifically about this program, and others on my blog, that's blogs.starcio.com, that talks about how to actually put together data science programs. So what are some of the business impacts? Okay, if you start putting together data science programs, what does that look like? Now, I remember in media, just as an example, if you wanted to do something in media that was changing a customer experience, you were going to call up an agency. They're going to come back with a bunch of creative. They might do some market research for you, and they're going to come back and say, build this great website or build this great mobile experience, and you're going to get your customers. What you can do today is a lot more than that, okay? You can use analysts to do market research. You can also do a lot of market research yourself. You can do a lot of persona definition, so not just capture data, but align that data that you're capturing with particular personas, and then do ongoing customer analytics. Okay, so that's a change from an old set of behaviors where you largely outsourced something to get an experience thought through, to one where you can use a mixture of experts, internal resources, and tools to actually go out and do that. I talked a lot about spreadsheets. I talk a lot about that in my blog because of how error-prone they are. But going from spreadsheets to dashboards to things that people can share, to looking at real-time data instead of snapshotted data or data posted into a PowerPoint is another huge business impact. I remember going into management meetings at two of my firms and say, what if we spend the next 6 months, and instead of using PowerPoint or Excel to talk through our stories, we connected directly to the CRM or we connect directly to the ERP and look at what the data is telling us. It makes a really big difference when you're trying to use those systems of records to make decisions. It also helps when you can actually go from an undefined state of data governance. Who owns this data? How should it be used? What are the privacy implications of it? How should I work with an outsourced vendor when they're building an application off of it? To a point where you can actually create defined data owners and actually iterate and improve data quality and master data techniques over time. So these are the types of things that are making business impacts as you go down the data journey. So where is this going? Now, I believe that technology and organizational changes are somewhat cyclical. So platforms like big data and mobile, enterprise SaaS, APIs and cloud, I'm sure these are all prevalent in your organization. We put these tools out there. We've started to experiment with them. And that leads to changes how the organization is actually going to work internally. So you need to put out new products and new experiences for customers. More people have started to do Agile, okay? Need to understand the customer experience, need to actually go into a holistic journey mapping, get an organizational skill to actually do product management, user experience, customer experience designed to reflect that. Data, we got all these tools to go do big data. Now we can become data-driven by empowering data scientists, by putting citizen data science programs together. And so now we're looking at the next wave of emerging technologies. They build on what the organizational capabilities were of the last round, and they're going to change how we operate over the next 3 to 5 years. So it could be artificial intelligence that's looking at patterns and automating things for you. It could be IoT taking sensors and making them more intelligent and bring their data into the environment. It could be blockchain. I spoke to a group of financial services groups. You know what blockchain is? It's basically a collaborative database. Right? You used to write to your Oracle database. Now 10 different companies can write to the same Oracle database. It's called a blockchain, and what's different is now there's now a single voice of truth through that single ledger. So that's a collaboration change, and that emerging platform is going to change how financial industry is going to operate over the next 5 to 10 years. So if you become data-driven in this time now, it's going to open up the capabilities to actually leverage the next wave of technologies, and there will be another set of organizational changes that come about because of this. As I said, I've been a CIO 3 times and a CTO 2 times. I figured out a number of these practices that I put in place, and I've been sharing them on my blog for the last 10 years. Over the last year, I've decided to put all this together in a more sequential book It covers what I think are the key practices that every IT organization needs to have to be able to run a transformation program. It doesn't talk about Agile in the most basic sense. It talks about how to take Agile and develop roadmaps and to get estimating practices in place, to develop a new set of roles and responsibilities so that the business and the technology teams can collaborate. It talks about how to work with outsourcing partners. It doesn't talk about cloud infrastructure. You know a lot about cloud infrastructure. It talks about how to implement a DevOps operation so that your ops team can continue to be ops people, but working in a more collaborative and faster environment, partnering with developers so you can get releases out on a more continuous cycle. It talks more about the citizen data science programs, and then it brings it all together with how to implement product management and how to change your C-suite organization. So that's Driving Digital. It comes out in August, and I have a link at the bottom, drivingdigital.com/nGage, where I will provide announcements around the book coming out. That's me. I'm now the president of StarCIO. I do consulting over digital transformation. And again, I want to thank the folks at nGage for having me speak to you today. Thank you.